Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in our series, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Great Expectations. At length, it had come into my head that the sign looked like a hammer, and on my lustily calling that word in my sister's ear, she had begun to hammer on the table and had expressed a qualified assent. Thereupon I had brought in all our hammers, one after another, but without avail. Then I bethought me of a crutch, the shape being much the same, and I borrowed one in the village, and displayed it to my sister with considerable confidence. But she shook her head to that extent when she was shown it, that we were terrified lest in her weak and shattered state she would dislocate her neck. When my sister found that Biddy was very quick to understand her, this mysterious sign reappeared on the slate. Biddy looked thoughtfully at it, heard my explanation, looked thoughtfully at my sister, looked thoughtfully at Joe, who was always represented on the slate by his initial letter, and ran into the forge, followed by Joe and me. "Why, of course," cried Biddy, with an exultant face. "Don't you see? It's him." Orlick, without a doubt. She had lost his name, and could only signify him by his hammer. We told him why we wanted him to come into the kitchen, and he slowly laid down his hammer, wiped his brow with his arm, took another wipe at it with his apron, and came slouching out, the curious loose vagabond bend in the knees that strongly distinguished him. I confess that I expected to see my sister denounce him, and that I was disappointed by the different result. She manifested the greatest anxiety to be on good terms with him, was evidently much pleased by his being at length produced, and motioned that she would have given something to drink. She watched his countenance as if she were particularly wishful to be assured that he took kindly to his reception. She showed every possible desire to conciliate him, and there was an humble proprietation in all she did, such as I have seen pervade the bearing of a child towards a hard master. After that day, a day rarely passed without her drawing the hammer on her slate, and without her Orlick's slouching in and standing doggedly before her, as if he knew no more than I did what to make of it. Chapter 17. I now fell into a regular routine of apprenticeship life, which was varied, beyond the limits of the village and the marshes, by no more remarkable circumstance than the arrival of my birthday, and my paying another visit to Miss Havisham. I found Miss Sarah Pocket still on duty at the gate. I found Miss Havisham just as I had left her, and she spoke of Estella in the very same way, if not in the very same words. The interview lasted but a few minutes, and she gave me a guinea when I was going, and told me to come again on my next birthday. I make mention at once that this became an annual custom. I tried to decline taking the guinea on the first occasion, but with no better effect than causing her to ask me very angrily if I expected more. Then and after that I took it. So unchanging was the dull old house, the yellow light in the darkened room, the faded spectre in the chair by the dressing-table glass, that I felt as if stopping of the clocks had stopped time in that mysterious place, and while I and everything else outside it grew colder, it stood still. Daylight never entered the house as to my thoughts and remembrances of it, any more than as to the actual fact. It bewildered me, and under its influence I continued at heart to hate my trade and to be ashamed of home. Imperceptibly I became conscious of a change in Biddy, however. Her shoes came up at the heel, her hair grew bright and neat, her hands were always clean. She was not beautiful, she was common, and could not be like Estella, but she was pleasant and wholesome and sweet-tempered. She had not been with us more than a year. I remember her being newly out of mourning at the time it struck me, when I observed to myself one evening that she had curiously thoughtful and attentive eyes that were very pretty and very good. It came of my lifting up my own eyes from a task I was poring at, writing some passages from a book to improve myself in two ways at once by a sort of stratagem, and seeing Biddy observant of what I was about. I laid down my pen, and Biddy stopped in her needlework without laying it down. "Biddy," said I, "how do you manage it? Either I'm very stupid, or you are very clever." "What is it that I manage? I don't know," returned Biddy, smiling. She managed our whole domestic life, and wonderfully too. But I did not mean that, though. That made what I did mean more surprising. How do you manage, Biddy, said I, to learn everything that I learn, and always to keep up with me? I was beginning to be rather vain of my knowledge, for I spent my birthday guineas on it and set aside the greater part of my pocket money for a similar investment, though I have no doubt now that the little I knew was extremely dear at the price. I might as well ask you, said Biddy, how you manage. No, because when I come in from the forge of a night, anyone can see me turning to it. But you never turn at it, Biddy. I suppose I must catch it, like a cough, said Biddy, quietly, and went on with her sewing. Pursuing my idea as I leaned back in my wooden chair and looked at Biddy sewing away with her head on one side, I began to think her rather an extraordinary girl, for I called to mind now that she was equally accomplished in the terms of her trade, and the names of different sorts of work and our various tools. In short, whatever I knew, Biddy knew. Theoretically, she was already as good as a blacksmith as I, or better. You are one of those, Biddy, said I, who make the most of every chance. You never had a chance before you came here, and see how improved you are. Biddy looked at me for an instant, and went on with her sewing. I was your first teacher, though, wasn't I? Said she, and she sewed. Biddy, I exclaimed, in amazement, why are you crying? No, I am not, said Biddy, looking up and laughing. What put that in your head? What could have put it in my head but the glistening of a tear as it dropped on her work? I sat silent, recalling what a drudge she had been until Mr. Wopsle's great aunt successfully overcame that bad habit of living. And so highly desirable to be got rid of by some people, I recalled the hopeless circumstances by which she had been surrounded in the miserable little shop, and the miserable little noisy evening school, with that miserable old bundle of incompetence always to be dragged and shouldered. I reflected that even in those untoward times there must have been latent in Biddy what was now developing. In my first uneasiness and discontent, I had turned to her for help as a matter of course. Biddy sat quietly sewing, shedding no more tears, and while I looked at her and thought about it all, it occurred to me that perhaps I had not been sufficiently grateful to Biddy. I might have been too reserved and should have patronized her more, though I did not use that precise word in my meditations with my confidence. Yes, Biddy, I observed, when I had done turning it over. You were my first teacher, and that at a time when we little thought of ever being together like this, in this kitchen. Ah, poor thing, replied Biddy. It was like her self-forgetfulness to transfer the remark to my sister, and to get up and be busy about her, making her more comfortable. That's sadly true. Well, said I, we must talk together a little more, as we used to do, and I must consult you a little more as I used to do. Let us have a quiet walk on the marshes next Sunday, Biddy, and a long chat. My sister was never left alone now, but Joe more than readily undertook the care of her on that Sunday afternoon, and Biddy and I went out together. It was summer-time and lovely weather, when we had passed the village and the church and the churchyard, and were out on the marshes and began to see the sails of the ships as they sailed on. I began to combine Miss Havisham and Estella with the prospect in my usual way. When we came to the riverside and sat down on the bank with the water rippling at our feet, making it all more quiet than it would have been without that sound, I resolved that it was a good time and place for the admission of Biddy into my inner confidence. Biddy, said I, after binding her to secrecy, I want to be a gentleman. Oh, I wouldn't if I was you, she returned. I don't think it would answer. Biddy, said I, with some severity, I have particular reasons for wanting to be a gentleman. You know best, Pip, but don't you think you are happier as you are? Biddy, I exclaimed impatiently, I am not at all happy as I am. I am disgusted with my calling and with my life. I have never taken to either since I was bound. Don't be absurd. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care. And thanks again.